Welcome back to my channel, guys. Greetings from Nice, France. I'm in the south of France, a region called in English French Riviera, although in French it's called something very different for whatever reason. Here we call it Côte d'Azur, which means basically the blue coast. Azur is a shade of blue, a specific shade of blue meant to depict the color of the sky. And then Côte means coast. So sky blue coast, basically. Interesting that in English we call it something different. I think Côte d'Azur frankly sounds a lot nicer, in my opinion. I decided to come here because I've always had this fascination with the south of France. To me, the south of France has a certain mystique. It's still France, but it's the Mediterranean version of France. The south of France, you have to remember, on one side is bordered by Spain, on the other side Italy, and the region in between is seaside, the Mediterranean Sea. So the other side of the Mediterranean is North Africa. You have Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco. All those countries, by the way, that I mentioned were colonized by the French at one point. So there's, with any colonization, what happens is then the cultural blend kind of goes both ways, right? So the south of France has this North African Mediterranean influence, but it's also still French. I've been to the south of France once before to this place called Aix-en-Provence, which I highly recommend. Beautiful place, but I wanted to try a different one this time around, and when I did some research, Nice just kept coming up as a major hub that I could stay in and explore, but also if I really wanted to, I could explore other places nearby. So interestingly, my first impression of Nice the night that I arrived here was not good. It changed during the trip, but let me just explain to you what happened the first night. So the first night I arrived on this super touristy street, tourist trap street, we'll call it. One of those streets where you can tell it's been designed purely for tourism. It's like super touristy restaurant next to a tchotchke store, where you get like souvenirs and stuff, and then like a gelato store, and then the pattern repeats. Touristy restaurant, tchotchke store, gelato or ice cream or some other like summer treat. Boom, 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 right? Tourists everywhere. This was a weeknight, by the way. Tourists everywhere. And I thought, oh shit, I hope that all of Nice is not like this and that this is just this area. And then I went for a stroll on the boardwalk, basically, of the beach here. Again, masses of people. This was a weeknight and there were masses of people. And I thought, fuck, maybe this wasn't a great idea to come to Nice. Like maybe I should have gone to less touristy place. Maybe I should have done more research, blah, blah, blah. By the way, to describe the beach aesthetic here, this is part of my first impression of Nice. Not my favorite kind of beach setup. Basically, you have the water, and then you have a huge road with cars whizzing by, and then you have mega hotel, boom, 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 across that strip. There's other cities like this around the world. Rio de Janeiro comes to mind. Santa Monica in Los Angeles, California is like that as well. It always feels tacky to me when you have the beach and then a huge strip of like cars whizzing by and then these mega gargantuan like corporate hotels laid out there. It just doesn't, it lacks charm. And where my hotel is now, which is only like 5 streets away from that other street I was talking about that was super touristy, it's so much calmer. And you feel like, even though there's of course tourists around, there's also locals and local boutiques and these beautiful residential buildings. And so I went on my little merry way and I fell in love with the architecture here. I've only seen architecture like this in Cairo, Egypt, and Barcelona, Spain, where I'm going after this actually. Speaking of tourist crowds, Barcelona is apparently very crowded, so we'll see how that goes. Stay tuned for that video. But the buildings here have that sandy yellow color juxtaposed with the blue sky is so pretty. You can tell the buildings here are very old, but that they're well maintained, taken care of, at least on the outside. It's just very pretty, very charming. And then I saw on Google Maps that there was Old Nice, called Vieille Ville in French. Vieille Ville means like Old Town. So I strolled around Old Nice and I completely fell in love. I've been going back almost every day this whole week, just wandering around. It's so quaint and romantic and colorful. And again, it's so interesting how you're in France, but it feels you very much are in the Mediterranean. And there were times where I actually felt like I was in Italy. It was reminiscent for me of when I went to Rome years ago. Old Nice for me is definitely the highlight part of this trip. If you come to Nice, you have to go to the Old Nice neighborhood. So now let's talk about the men. This is now the gay travel part of this video. So the men are beautiful and it's exactly what I envisioned, which is this blend of Mediterranean and North African influence and French all mixed together. Walking down the street, I've seen many a handsome fellow. Interestingly, I haven't seen any rainbow flags walking around, and I was surprised by that because I feel like beach towns tend to attract gay men, pretty beach towns. And also Nice is such a tourist hub, so I just feel like tourist hubs have learned to embrace gay communities because of the gay dollar, right? Like if they can make money off of it. So I was surprised. You know, I've been to more conservative places where even there that you see rainbow flags. I've even seen rainbow flags in parts of Turkey, and Turkey's way more conservative than France. So I was surprised by that. So then I looked on Google Maps to see if there were any gay bars at all. There was this one section that had both gay bars and gay friendly, I guess, establishments, all on the edge of Old Nice, this neighborhood that I was just talking about. And what's interesting is the other night I went for a run on the boardwalk here on the beach, and I first started out going west and had, you know, a regular run, and then I went back east, finishing up around the Old Nice area. And once I crossed like that threshold, at a certain point I started observing gay men. Like I could see that there were, for whatever reason, there seemed to be a sudden influx of gay men, both in just their demeanor. Like you kind of just know sometimes. I saw two guys holding hands, so that obviously gives it away. And then just a few guys like checking me out when I was running. And so I put two and two together, like, oh, Google Maps is saying this is where the gay bars are. That's where I finished up my run. This must be kind of like the gay hub of the city. So I had dinner in Old Nice one night, and I figured, let me see if I stumble upon one of these gay bars. I'm just strolling around, right? And I walked by one that I almost missed because it was more kind of discreet. No rainbow flags, just some people sitting outside on the terrace. The inside was deserted, but it was also like, I want to say like 9:30 p.m., so not that unusual. Then I walked by another one that again, I almost missed. And here's a picture of the signage. So easy to miss. And by the way, the bar was closed. It opened at 10 p.m., which I also thought was interesting that it opened so late. But between that and the other bar that I walked by, what that tells you is that the traffic to these gay bars is not that high. Maybe at 2 a.m. it's popping, I don't know. But it's just interesting to me because the surrounding bars and restaurants were packed. Apparently these gay bars are not having the same amount of traffic. You know, the last two videos I made, travel videos in Amsterdam and Paris, you could not miss those gay bars when you were in those areas that I mentioned. So it made me wonder why Nice is different. Perhaps because it's the Old Nice area, maybe there's a certain sort of code that they have to follow with these establishments to maintain you know, it's like the old historic charming neighborhood. Maybe it has to look a certain way. Maybe they can't dangle flags. I don't know. Or I thought, is it a cultural thing? Nice is probably much more conservative than Paris. It's still France, which is generally a liberal country. But maybe because it's the Mediterranean, it's a more discreet culture. I wasn't sure. If you have context on this watching this video, if you're from Nice or just, you know more about it than I do as a visitor, please let us know in the comments. I'm very curious. So now let's talk about the apps. As I mentioned, walking around, I've seen a lot of handsome guys, a lot of beautiful men, very mixed, very ethnically ambiguous. Interestingly, I haven't seen so many of them on the apps. I remember this happening to me, interestingly, in San Diego. Like, that's the first thought that came to my head, that I remember in San Diego having the same experience of the beauty that I see in real life, I'm not seeing on these apps. I don't know why that is. Is it that there's just fewer gay people here? Is it that it's, for whatever reason, people use apps less here versus Paris or another major city? Like, what is that about? This is one of those places, like many other smaller cities, where you go through profiles very quickly on an app like Bumble, where you swipe through. On an app like Grindr, very quickly, the guys are farther and farther away since Grindr is GPS based. If you're familiar with Grindr, you add a few filters and suddenly the guys are like 5 miles away, 10 miles away. So anytime that happens, it's indicative of one or two things. A, that there's just fewer people in that place. It's not as densely populated as, of course, a major city like Paris. You know, being in Paris before this kind of spoils you in the same way that a place like New York City or London spoils you, very densely populated cities. Or is it that there's just fewer gay people here, that gay people are not as attracted to this region? I don't know. I also noticed that guys here are not as friendly as other parts of France, at least compared to Paris. I felt like the guys in Paris were way more charming and kinder on apps, inquisitive. Here, the vast majority of guys that I reach out to, like 90+% have not responded. Today I matched with a guy on Bumble who lives in Nice, and literally as we matched and I'm saying hello, he unmatched me. But I will say, Nice is a lot like Miami, where I live in the US, in that it's such a transient place, right? The south of France in general is such a tourist hub in the summer that I can imagine that transience makes guys on apps, particularly who live here, maybe more impatient, maybe less, respectful, because they're used to that revolving door and they're either looking for something casual themselves or they probably want something more meaningful. And so they don't want to waste their time, which I don't blame them if that's the case. For me, it's the same thing in Miami. After the novelty factor wore off of living there, it's like, I don't want to just keep talking to guys visiting for the weekend. You know, it becomes too common and it becomes too difficult. You want something more stable. But then again, I would never unmatch somebody literally as they're typing, because Bumble shows you when somebody's typing. To me, that's like a whole other level of lack of tact. So the gay travel experience here is not necessarily the best, but I will say that one amazing thing about the south of France, and really you could say this about a lot of places in Europe, it is so well connected by public transportation to other parts in this region that you can get to a lot of other cities and towns in the area in under an hour just by taking the local train. So actually the train that I took to get here from Paris, and Paris is like central north of France, so I basically took a train across the country to get here, and there were stops on the way that were on the coast, including Cannes, which in English we call Cannes, doesn't sound as nice, Cannes, where they have the Cannes Film Festival, a bunch of other little towns on the way. It's really nice to have that here. I mean, even getting to the airport from here, I discovered today, would take me half an hour by taking the local train, and it's going to cost me less than €2. I mean, that's amazing. So regarding the distance thing that I mentioned with apps and maybe more limited guys here in terms of the apps, the thing is, it's less of a relevant issue because here, other places nearby are so accessible by public transportation. If you've been to Nice or the south of France in general, or perhaps you live here, I would love to hear your feedback, your opinions. Let us know in the comments, share with the class. Next up on this trip, I'm headed to Spain, to Barcelona, and then Madrid. So stay tuned for those videos if you're curious on my travel experiences there, particularly when it comes to being a gay person in those cities, and I'll catch you next time.